We launched our first arbitrage unit in December 2016. Could have raised the money to grow much quicker. But what we really were aiming for was how could we scale, but scale in a way where, the business is strong, right? Not just the financial side, but like the guest experience side. Short-term rental is fundamentally a great business. If you combine different strategies together, you can build a really, really nice business for yourself. Isaac, thank you for joining us today. So I'm kind of curious as how you kind of think about scalability versus, a very unique experience that has a lot of moat against competition.
Yeah. What really matters in my mind is let's be honest. I'd love to know your guest satisfaction, and I trust you're probably absolutely the best of the best here. But the couple, maybe 3 experiences I've had in properties similar to what we're describing have all been absolutely awful for me.
No, you asked a question on guest satisfaction. I think it comes down to 2 things, right? I think one is, welcome back to STR Like the Best. I'm your host, Michael Chang. We're here on a special episode. I'm actually here in California at my parents' house, but I really, really wanted to do this podcast today because of the special guest that we have on the show, Isaac French. Isaac, thank you for joining us today.
Michael, I appreciate you having me on.
Well, thank you for taking time. You're always on the road and traveling, so glad I'm going to get you situated and sitting. You're very well known in the short-term rental community, but why don't I give you maybe a minute or so if you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. So I live in Central Texas, and I guess the STR audience and world that I'm starting to tap into came from a project I did called Live Oak Lake. And before that, I had grown up working in construction in my family's business, and then was an accountant, bookkeeper by trade, but have also always been artistic and creative, and had this dream to create a village of cabins. And so, long story short, found 5 acres one morning while scrolling Zillow, and less than 10 months later, from closing on that property, opened the doors to Live Oak Lake. It's a 7-cabin micro resort, Nordic inspired, a lot of nature, immersive experiences, kayaking, fishing, trails, campfires, hammocks. Pretty straightforward stuff, but a lot of attention to detail and intentionality and just the way that it's all put together. And then I've driven a lot of direct bookings to that and built a brand around and so now this whole genre of experiential hospitality and really unique one-of-a-kind stays, I'm really excited and passionate about that. And so I'm able to connect with and help, probably 30 or 40 others around the country now that I'm actively involved or have been involved with in creating these stays.
That's amazing. I think that's a great topic to tap on, especially as the short-term rental space has evolved into much more unique properties. Will give you a moat against competition. I think that's a big point I wanted to talk about today, since that's candidly how you and I connected in a kind of untraditional way. But before we get there, what projects are you currently working on now for yourself?
So as far as real estate, I'm not currently working on my own project. I just finished building the Nook, which is my office and art studio, which I may turn into a short-term rental at some point. And I have been, like I mentioned earlier, pretty active in helping others, funneling all of my energy into more consulting and also improving some of our existing properties. We did a train car, which we can get into if you want.
Yeah.
Took an old rotted train car, and now we're adding saunas and a whole wellness component to that. So kind of a little bit of everything at the moment.
I want to talk about a train thing. I saw your postings it was on LinkedIn when I read it. It was really, I was really, really, your storytelling was, I think, really A++. The way that you described the property and how just everything about it. I kind of don't want to give it away a little bit. I want to hear from you, because it was actually really inspiring. I'm very kind of numbers oriented. My wife is my partner in the business, Liz. Liz is much more artistic, and I've gotten a little bit of that over the last 7 years. But she's still that kind of design brain, and to kind of see it all, see that put together, I thought it was actually truly fascinating. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, I'd love to hear it personally.
Yeah. So the train car chronologically actually was the birthplace of this whole passion that I have for experiential hospitality. It was right before the Live Oak Lake project, but I was living in Idaho, which is where a lot of my family lives. And this is middle of nowhere, 2 hours from an interstate. And you don't go there unless you have a really good reason to. And my dad got a call one day. This was actually a few winters ago because we knew about it for a couple years before we were able to do anything. He got a call from our neighbor who is a wheat farmer and who's like 90 years old, sweetest guy, and needed help shoveling his roof on his barn. So my dad went over there by himself. We were doing something else. I don't remember what. And when he got there, he walked inside and there's this old 61-foot train car, wooden train car. And honestly, most people probably wouldn't even recognize that as such. It had been sort of like boarded over and 10 and 20 some cats were living inside of it. So it stunk terribly. And it was a pretty nightmare scene for most people, but his eyes lit up. He's a train enthusiast and he immediately knew what it was. And he'd already done some of the history on the local railroads there, which had been used for the timber industry, because that's a big like forested logging part of the country. And we had already become friends with this guy. And he was like, "Hey, Loyal, would you ever consider selling that thing? I'd be interested in buying it." And the guy was like, "Yeah, make me an offer." So he said $3,000. And the farmer's like, "Sure, you can have it." I mean, I've been protecting it. The guy who owned it had bought it from a farmer before him who had bought it from the railroad when they decommissioned all the tracks back in the 50s. So this thing had been sitting for decades unused and most of that time out in a field, literally rotting. And the guy before him had been like feeding hay out of it and grain to his animals. And so it was like a little mini barn. And this guy had actually built the roof around it and whatnot to protect it. So then we had to figure out how in the world do we move this thing? And this was my dad. I'm not the level of visionary that he is in the sense of like seeing potential in something that looks really bad in terms of like a structure. And so he finally found this mover, paid him $10,000. 2 years later, it took him to actually line that up. And we got it over to a piece of property we already owned, which we had bought for like $1,400 an acre. It was a beautiful property, got a very good deal on it, and drug it up to the top of this hill. And then this was January, February of 2020. So what was happening? The whole world was shutting down. People were quarantined. So it was the perfect opportunity to embark on this outdoor adventurous project. So that's exactly what we did. I have 7 brothers. We're all pretty industrious and we all grew up as, doing crafts, doing construction. So literally we did 95% of the work. We had to hire like a subcontract for the HVAC and maybe part of the electrical, but like all the restoration we did ourselves in about 4.5 months' time, stripped the entire thing down. I mean, completely brought back to life, built an awning over it that sort of resembles an old train depot to cover it, keep it out of the elements. And my mom picked all the furniture. She's like into antiques. And so we brought it all the way back to that period. The train car is 120 years old. So back to the early 1900s, and set it up and listed on Airbnb in August. And actually, part of the way through that process, a TV show found out about the project through a friend of a friend, and they're like, "Oh, we want to document this." So they actually filmed it. And so when we launched, that was the big driver. Because again, at that point, I had no bearing on social media or building a brand or any of that stuff, direct booking. So that TV show called Restoration Road, it's season 1, episode 1, if anybody wants to see it, ended up being a massive catalyst. So that alone booked it out about 18 months, 90% occupancy at, $300-400 a night, literally within weeks. Because the show aired within a couple months of when we actually made it go live. So the timing was absolutely perfect. And what we realized is that people want that. People want a story and people want something that is one of a kind that they can't get anywhere else. They want an experience. So that was definitely the seed that was planted in my mind. I moved to Texas a couple months after that project. And a couple months after that is when Live Oak Lake happened. And then it's just been a domino ever since.
That's amazing. That's probably the coolest family COVID project I've ever heard of, actually. I've heard a few, actually. That's just really, that's really wonderful how you and your brothers and your dad and your mom, like everyone was super involved in building this. And they had the TV show and it's launched your maybe part 2 of your career, your post-finance career now into short-term rentals and experiential hospitality. And thank you for setting the groundwork. That was really cool, actually, to hear the story live. I think we come at short-term rentals from 2 different vantage points. I started a business back in 2016. I come from a finance background, live in New York City, and I'm very kind of numbers oriented. And like, how do you scale? How do you get the margins? So look, our portfolio is 39 properties. We're most of them, 28 of them, commodity apartments. They are apartments in Philadelphia. They're decorated well. They're located in, I think good areas. They have amenities, but they're not. There's no kayaking involved, and I don't think you'd want to kayak along the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. You're going to need a tetanus. Make sure your vaccines are updated, or at least your tetanus shot is updated. That's done well for us. But as the market has evolved, our latest project up in the Catskills in New York State, excuse me, biggest property ever. We bought 2 acres. It was a chalet. It's cool. Kind of you can see the ski runs from there. But we really really thought about the experience much more than we did on the apartments in Philadelphia. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you can think about how you found this podcast, maybe it was on TikTok or Instagram, or maybe someone shared it with you. I don't run ads for the show or have any sponsorships. So the only way this grows is through word of mouth. If my podcast is valuable for you in any way, please hit the subscribe button and share this with someone who you think would help their investing journey or business. Thanks a lot, and let's continue on with the episode. And just kind of laying that groundwork in, I think there are real competitive moats when you are doing that, when you are building, Live Oak, or building the early 1900s train kind of experience, or even up into mountains, just something kind of different and special. And I kind of just want to hear from you on, as you think about maybe just kind of like your numbers hat and your hospitality hat on at the same time. I guess, how do you think about where you're building this great experience, but it's fundamentally, at least I think, not as scalable because it takes a lot of time to find a unique property and then to make it nice and make sure all the pieces are in place where you have a very kind of special experience. Because like you walk into like Four Seasons or the Amman or something, right? Every single detail, they're all aligned, right? Like you walk into Amman in Venice, you're like, holy crap! Like this is one of the most beautiful houses you've ever been to, and everything is very congruent. Whereas more commodity experience and more scalable experience, like it has to be very modular. So I'm kind of curious as how you kind of think about maybe scalability versus a very unique experience that has a lot of moat against competition.
Yeah. So I was on Rich Summers' pod and was telling him about all these crazy experiences that I've seen, and some of which I've been involved in: tree houses, floating homes, the micro resort cabin village thing, so many different cool concepts. And then he was asking me about sort of the future of Airbnb, is how he put it. It's a pretty broad question. So, one angle that I take on that is like, I love Airbnb. I think it's done a ton in sort of democratizing the accommodation space and allowing people like me that didn't have a background in hospitality to become basically a hotelier. But we're also seeing this sort of stigma now around Airbnb and sort of these inconsistencies in guest experience. And of course, there's the whole NIMBY, not cities banning Airbnb perspective on it too, which I'm neither here nor there on. There's obviously like a lot of hotel lobbying that comes into it. So there's different ways to take that question. The way I took it in the podcast was, sort of the commoditized versus experiential Airbnb, short-term rental, whatever you want to call it. And this, I absolutely stand by. I believe applies to hotels as much as it applies to Airbnbs. It applies to boutique hotels. There's a lot of fancy labels like boutique hotel you can even put on something. But what really matters in my mind is like, if you're trying to offer something that is differentiated, is like, what is the experience? And there is an inevitable tension between scale, which is the question you were getting at, and offering something that really is one of a kind, and that's just, to use the Will Guidara framework, that's unreasonably hospitable. So anyway, he made a clip of this, and a lot of people saw that clip. It seemed to be pretty controversial. And I'm just going to read your comment because your comment got a lot of traction. You said, Isaac, this is highly misleading and unsupported by the data. Your properties are beautiful, but there are many strategies to succeed in short-term rentals. Boutique experiences cater to a tiny part of the market. So I think I had made some sweeping statement like, these things are going away.
Do you believe? I think the actual clip was, what do you think about rental arbitrage? And the clip, and I agree, it wasn't a direct response to that question, but it was arbitrage operators are going bankrupt and dying. And I was like, that seemed hyperbolic.
Yeah.
That 10 seconds was hyperbolic, and I don't think that was
Yeah.
like I don't take that back. I thought, and I believe it was hyperbolic, but I wanted to. It was more like to the equally kind of controversial, or the equally retort was like meant to be very direct too. Like, I don't think arbitrage operators are not all going bankrupt. Are some unsuccessful? Absolutely. But are some like experiential hospitality people like not doing super great? 100% too. I get a lot of those messages too, because like, yeah, I put a lot of capex in here and it's not coming back, and I don't know when we're having to get this money back, and the bank won't refinance this because it's in the middle of nowhere, and they won't do rural property. So I think there's a lot of like, it is, to your point, a lot of nuance that is very, social media is not a great platform. You can't have nuance in 15 seconds, right? It's just like, you need a soundbite and go.
Yeah, I think I said most of those people that built big portfolios and that were crowing about arbitrage have either gone belly up or bankrupt. I'll honestly stand by what I said too, because I think, I don't have numbers on it. It's anecdotal, but from the impressions that I saw, and maybe this is partly too because like social media amplifies obviously what's the most controversial thing and what's the most confident, yeah, polarizing kind of statement. But I saw like all of these people on YouTube and lots of social media platforms before I was ever on there that would, build up pretty big followings and created quite a movement around, especially the arbitrage model. And it was this whole, basically like, how many keys can you get? Bro energy, you're going to come in here and hustle culture, and you're just going to like blah, 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 blah. Which is cool. Like, great. I'm glad some people made bank when they did. I just don't think that that's a sustainable model. So this is very good context on both sides for the positions taken in the post. But
Yeah.
so,
and actually,
go
just
ahead.
to that point, like, I agree that the hyperscalers within Airbnb, it doesn't work either. Actually, the people that have, I know, like, I mean, pre-COVID, there were some of those companies. Stay Operate was a good example, that were broadly distributed, and arbitrage companies that went belly up in 2 months because they had no reserves or over levered. There are other people that I know that scaled very, very quickly and ultimately, could not withstand volatility, right? Because arbitrage by itself, that model is very levered. I think there's a huge cohort of people like me that have 10, 15, 20, 30, where, it's small enough where you can still manage that leverage responsibly, but still create a product that, while commoditized, and I think that's a very broad word too, we can talk about that. It can be a commoditized as in it doesn't have a kayak, it doesn't have a lake, but what it does have is an amazing location 10 minutes within the city center that you can't replicate. You can't replicate that as well. There is a certain, finite area there. Regulatory, where the zoning allows you to do short-term rentals properly within an urban area when you have the right licenses and permits. That's also, and when we're talking about experiential, or at least when I think about that, it means a moat to competition. Like, no one can recreate Live Oak in that way, right? It's very difficult to do that. And I think that's where we try to do that within arbitrage spaces, where, if you have parking, a view, a gym, a pool, 10 minutes outside the city center, the right market, with the right permits, like, that's a great business model, because it's really going to be hard for someone to come in and attack. I can't think of the right word, but attack
Okay,
that
so
moat.
question there. I agree with that completely. Like, I always say there's always going to be a need, and I don't mean this in a condescending way, but sort of like for the heads and beds model, which doesn't just mean like, the Motel 8. It could be something very, very nice, very quality, but pretty plain vanilla when it comes to the actual guest experience. There's always going to be a need for that. There's going to be business travelers. There's going to be economy travelers. There's going to be people that just don't care at all and, about really where they stay. But my question is like, okay, so my view is that cohort, that segment of the market is going to dramatically shrink. Not to be too hyperbolic, but I think that's going to go way down from let's say it was 90% of the market. That's going to become 20% of the market. Very rough numbers. But then the other sort of like risk factor there is like regulation. So tell me from your perspective, because you are a lot more versed in this. I keep, you see the headlines and all these cities are banning Airbnbs. What do you do about that?
Yeah, so I'll take the question straight on. I think, a ban is where you cannot do it, right? Like, you ban murder, right? They can't kill someone. But what a lot of cities, counties are doing, they're just putting some just common sense regulations around short-term rentals, where a lot of it, this space grew so quickly, so fast post COVID, right? Where proper permitting requirements, how many people are staying there, do you have proper life and safety, do you have fire extinguishers in the right places? There's some basic things that a lot of cities are asking short-term rental operators to do, and I think that's a good thing. Where you're hearing the bans is like New York City, right? New York City has effectively a ban on Airbnb. Boston does, right? But Philadelphia does not. Austin doesn't, right? Where Dallas doesn't, right? They have
Dallas does in a big section now, I think, right?
Dallas has it where they're restricting it in residential areas, like purely residential areas, right?
Which is pretty common. A lot of people are doing that. Yeah.
Right, a lot of people are doing that, but and also the regulations in Dallas are being challenged in court, and I think there's a movement against that. Like, do the San Antonio model. If we're going to stay within Texas, San Antonio allows short-term rentals in residential areas, but they have specific regulations where you can have one, and it's actually like a natural monopoly. What they're doing is you can have one house, and the next 7 houses or next 10 houses, depending on exactly where, cannot be short-term rentals. So you have one house in the middle of the block. And then, the 7 houses next to you or 10 houses next to you cannot be short-term rentals. So it's like, I understand what they're doing. They don't want these neighborhoods to become hotels, which I think makes sense. Right. And then you have to tell your neighbors and some, just common sense life and safety things. Right. That's very reasonable. Like, everyone should do that. Right. Yeah. What I don't agree with is in New York City, where, effectively we have a very unique situation here where the labor unions are very strong here with the hospitality unions, the hotel unions, and the real estate developers are also very, very strong here. So you have both, kind of left and right, very aligned on killing Airbnb in New York City because, one, the developers want to have higher ADRs in their properties and their cat rates go up. And the hotel lobby wants people to not stay in Airbnbs because then their members have work. So it makes it, and it's a very blue city. So it all lines up really well. But I don't think that fact pattern is going to be replicated across the country broadly. Boston, yes, maybe, but like,
what about like Chicago and DC and LA? Maybe I'm totally
DC, no, DC. So look, DC is. Chicago is residential area. Again, residential,
like Dallas.
I don't know the exact nuance, and someone that's listening to this can message me and we can have a sort of discussion on that. But I know a couple operators with scaled operations there, and what I understand is buildings that are more than 6 or 8 units, 25% of them can be short-term rentals in the right zoning. So again, I think ban is the term du jour today, but I think a lot of people say that everything's being banned, right? That's not true. It's just actually factually untrue. Even in New York City, there are exceptions. It's just, if you have a legal Airbnb in New York City, which is why, kind of some of the other smaller, like Sonder has a hotel down here, basically, that's a short-term rental. You have a very valuable business because you have all these regulatory moats around you that prevent competition.
Okay. All right. So that paints a lot more like clarity that would give me confidence as an investor. So as far as like now sort of moving into the nuts and bolts of what is the experience that we're offering respectively to the guests, I totally see the need for what you're providing. Would you advise someone, say like me, let's say I had, a chunk of money I wanted to invest and diversify, and even, let's say I believe strongly in the experiential space, which I do, but wanted to like put it in some eggs in a different basket.
Yeah.
Would you say go with an operator who's more like your size, who's focused? What is the criteria that you would be looking for to vet and to really underwrite this model that will work?
On the arbitrage side?
Yeah.
Okay. I've helped over 200 students that want to build this business, successfully launch theirs, and where I think the sweet spot of the market is, I think fundamentally this is not a venture business. And what I mean by that is this is not something where you can put like a $10-20 million A round behind and it IPOs like 10 years later. Like, this isn't that kind of model. Arbitrage is a very, very good SMB model, a very, very good small, medium-sized business, right? Whether it's 10 units, 30, 50, I think there's a natural cap there depending on kind of where you operate, because the issue when you have so many properties is just the complexity compounds exponentially, right? The problem is that like we have at 10, we have the same 10 problems that 50 properties, it's not like you have 50 problems. You have like 250 problems because they all just kind of compound on each other. So there's a natural ceiling, but if you find a good operator that has a good brain and that can like figure it out and is somewhat tech savvy, and in a market where there's some natural barriers to entry, like Houston's tough because it's just like kind of like a free for all there. But other locations where there are some natural moats, if you have some money like you, so you have some money to invest and partner with someone, you tell me the metrics on Live Oak, right? But I challenge someone to find me a business that I can scale to, call it $3 million a year with 40% cash margins, and I get my money back in 5 to 6 months. And it operates like fairly semi-passively, right? You don't need, you need a $300,000 person to run that business. You need someone just kind of like check the books and let it run. Like that's a very nice business to have, right? Where you're doing, $1 million a year cash flow, and then you can take that money and go buy property and make something a bit more. Like I don't recommend arbitrage for buying. I don't recommend kind of the commoditized city model for buying. Numbers actually don't work at all. Like you take that money and you go buy something in the Catskills, you buy something in Central Texas, you make it nice and let it appreciate, get the tax benefits. Like that for me is the right formula to compound net worth over a longer time scale, right? Arbitrage is a great business to get started, to earn cash flow, but take that money and reinvest it into properties
Experiential hospitality
are more unique. And you're right, more experiential. But I would flip that. What you said, kind of 80-20. I think experiential is a much smaller part of the market. To be fair, I think that's a 20. The 80s. Look at Airbnb's numbers. Look at the supply growth they're looking at. It cannot all be experiential hospitality. It's impossible. There's not enough land in the world to do that.
Well, exactly, that's a fair point. What I'm saying is, experiential. All these terms become so broad and like meaningless. There's such a spectrum and it's not just one dimension. It's multidimensional. So I think there's ways that you could take, commoditized arbitrage properties and experientialize them to some degree in terms of like thoughtful touch points with the guest, maybe some kind of all the way down to like really small details and
like what? What I'm curious. What do you think? Like,
so
give me an example.
What's the check-in experience for your guest? And is there like a welcome gift? Like what does that look like?
If you want to do 40% margins, you're not going to get with those kind of ADRs. Like the extras they're tough to justify from ROI perspective. So the check-in process is quite simple. They come in, they check in their front desk. They have all the information beforehand. They park the car, they go upstairs and keypad. That's it. There's very little interaction between hosts and guests. And that's what the guest likes. Like they want to just go in and it's like a hotel, they just want to go in and do their thing. And, I want to just kind of actually, I want to differentiate because what that's going to sound like is this a hotel and just a box with a bed. But it's not though. For us, it's 2 bedrooms. We're catering to group travel, right? Where people don't want to get multiple hotel rooms where, you can't be on the same floor sometimes, right? Depending on the hotel. They're 2 bedrooms, they're together. There's a living room, there's a kitchen. They can have breakfast together, they can sit and watch TV and, have that kind of experience. And that's something that hotels absolutely can't, or I don't believe can replicate really because just the way that they're set up.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, like, what is the design on one of these units typically? And what is your model? Are you doing a lot of like value add design stuff to these units, or what does that look like?
I wish I could just show you. I'm going to show you one. They're very nicely designed. This isn't IKEA. I was like the derisive term of IKEA in a box. We'll spend $10-12 a square foot to decorate it. So they're very nicely designed. Isn't the right word, decorated, because like if it's arbitrage, you're fundamentally not making any changes to the floor plan. Like you're
interior design decor. Yeah,
it's just like wallpaper and like bed. But the bedding. You want to make it look really nice and full, right? But it's not where we're at. We're not doing any value add there. Wouldn't make sense for us. The experiential part it's different from what you can get in an urban environment, and then it has all the amenities where a gym, a front desk check-in, elevator, a view. Some of them have a pool, so you kind of get like the home, like a home experience, but then you get all the nice amenities in a hotel.
Are there outdoor spaces, rooftop decks to these buildings?
Not decks, but just rooftops, just like a rooftop. Like you kind of go up to a rooftop. There's some chairs. You have a nice view of the city. you can sit there, take some pictures, have a drink. There's a few that we have that are pool, but and we try not to advertise the pools too much because we don't want we don't want people to be silly up there.
So what are these groups traveling for? Is it like for an event that they're coming to, or
concerts? People come in for group travel for work. I mean, a lot of people come for a convention. Kind of big. If you have like 4 people that go to a convention, they can all kind of stay together, or they get 2 next to each other. They can have a place to work afterwards, right? If you've done the concert, if you've done the conference thing before, especially if you're a small company, you need to kind of, once you're done, you're going to go back and like do all the work afterwards, like who'd you meet and all the notes and all the follow-ups and everything, right? It's nice to just sit there with everyone and do that versus, sitting in the hotel bar and doing that.
Yeah. So what I would say is you're pretty dependent, obviously, on like the bones of the building that you're using and what's there, what you can do, what you can't do. I always say, like, again, like these are very nature immersive properties that I'm typically involved in, but landscape, plants, nature, let's just put it that bucket, everything in that bucket is the highest ROI investment you can make. And so if you had a common space where you could have some small trees and some planters, maybe even a fire pit, something like that, that would be ideal, because then you can use obviously that marketing material, even if it's just on Airbnb or whatever the OTA is you're booking through, to drive bookings to all those units in that building. That's obvious, assuming that you have decent interior decor and you've thought that through and it's a nice, like desirable product. I would say like the lowest hanging fruit, and this is not well thought through, just thoughts that come to mind, would be some kind of a personalized welcome gift. And I know that seems like a heavy lift, but I think there are ways to systematize this. And I always say, like, the devil's in the details, but people a lot of times as hosts just totally overlook the most important touch points. So maybe it's just your messaging and that's entirely automated, but even the way that that's like the copy is crafted can come across either very personal and add that hospitality element, which is all about how you make people feel, versus, just giving them a product, turning a product into an experience and one that they really like, and therefore building a relationship with them. And maybe you say, well, you don't need that because, again, like, given the product and the market type, we're not trying to get repeat bookings. But maybe they would tell their friends. Maybe they would have other people that would come back and book. But ultimately, like, how can you make small systems, like, for instance, a personalized welcome gift that sort of tells a story? Maybe it has a map of the local area. Maybe it has a few locally sourced snacks or ingredients. Maybe some kind of like a fun little booklet about the building or about the locale or the region or whatever. These are like really small, but they could make a huge difference because the guest will feel cared for. And the cleaning staff, the housekeeping staff, could most likely do 100% of this work. So anyway, not to spend too much time on it, but I think there's ways that you can experientialize and sort of just bring back that element of hospitality, which is like that feeling of surprise and delight and being cared for, and an unexpected gift that that is common to all of us, no matter what we're traveling for. Again, take it or leave it. And these probably seem like way too obvious of small things, but
No,
what comes to mind.
I appreciate that, and you're an expert in that, and that's why I wanted to speak with you. Now, I mean, those are ideas that we're, as entrepreneurs and as this space continues to evolve, you got to level up your game. Even on our side too, especially, it's highly competitive. So that's something we're looking at too. But the devil's in the details, and I appreciate that there's a plan to do that. To give, I don't know if it's going to be a localized book, but just but I think to your point, like, just making the guests feel cared for, and so like that you were thoughtful that when they come in, there's just some snacks, just like whether it's like simple snacks or just some water, where they feel like, hey, I just got off the plane, and I just been traveling. Oh, I'm hungry and I'm thirsty. That's so nice that someone kind of left some water and a drink for me. Like, that's just a nice way to walk in somewhere where they're like, they just feel.
Let's be honest.
Someone cares.
Like, I'd love to know the guest satisfaction, and I trust you're probably like absolutely the best of the best here. But the couple, maybe 3 experiences I've had in properties similar to what we're describing have all been like absolutely awful for me. It wasn't like I walked in and there was like an extremely dirty mess that wasn't cleaned up. There were like clearly things that probably weren't set straight. But the thing about hospitality is, like, again, we're all imperfect. We're all human. We're going to make mistakes. Every team, every company is going to, you can't be watertight when it comes to being absolutely perfect. So what you need, in my opinion, to sort of bridge that gap with the guest, with the customer, is that sense of trust that you do care for them. And so whether it was the messaging, the lack of responsiveness, the sort of like cold business-like interaction when I did respond, when I did ask for something that was like, heavily corporate and sort of like by the rule book, or just like not a clean apartment, or not as what was advertised, or I said apartment, room, whatever it is. They've all been like really bad experiences, and maybe I just got really unlucky. Maybe there's been like one sort of like what we're talking about, and I generally don't stay in these places, but I have a couple times. So I think that like maybe the opportunity is just for some of these players, like the big players, especially the ones you do hear their names, some of which have gone belly up and bankrupt, some of which have not. But if they're going to get their act together, they can't have this mindset of just, again, like quantity. And of course, they wouldn't ever say this internally, but it's just like this number of keys. How can we slap out more units, grow a bigger team so we can hire more talent to do this, that, and the other thing? It's much, to me, about scale and scaling too fast as it is about commodity versus experience, just because you lose that personal connection and you lose that trust. And as a guest, that's as a host, that's extremely important that you maintain some level where there's like a grace where the guest feels like, okay, well, it's not perfect, but I messaged the host. They seem like a great person. They left me a note, this, that, and the other thing. I'll forgive them. Or maybe I'll even be a raving fan because what was sort of meant to be an ordinary experience became extraordinary because of these little thoughtful touch points.
Yeah. No, like I like, I like the word you use there, grace. Like no one's perfect, and there's always gonna be little things here and there. And that's why when you walk in somewhere where I think we give a lot of information up front. I do put our staff's been trained to be human in the approach, not corporate speak. You asked the question on guest satisfaction. Our properties have consistently got above a 4.85 on Airbnb, so I think I feel good about that. And then it comes down to two things, right? I think one is we don't go for that, and I purposely didn't do that, right? We've been doing this for 7 years. We launched our first arbitrage in December 2016. We could have, and I came from a background in finance. I could have had the money or could have raised the money to grow much quicker. But what we really were aiming for was how could we scale, but scale in a way where, the business is strong, right? Not just the financial side, but that like the guest experience side. People would care, people would like the experience and give us good reviews so that, we would continue to show up high on the Airbnb algorithm. Exceedingly difficult for, these big national players. Just look at Vacasa, for example, right? And I'm not picking on them, but they're a public company. They report their numbers. It's awful. I mean, their metrics look terrible. They lose customers. It costs them too much to get customers. They lose customers too quickly, and everyone just doesn't like staying there, right? And just because it's too broadly distributed. So, my advice to anyone listening now is, arbitrage is short-term rentals. I think fundamentally great. It's a really, really great business. I've seen many businesses in my career, and this is, I think, one of the best. And if you combine different strategies together thoughtfully, you can build a really, really nice business for yourself. Whether it's arbitrage to start, right? Where if you have some money and, you want to build 10, 15, 20 units, you can still do that and still have Isaac's, kind of hospitality. It's still small enough where you can have a more boutique hospitality approach and it can be more personalized, but it can still, maybe it's not 40% margins, maybe it's 30% margins. That's fine. But that's still going to be a 6-figure business for you. And I think a lot of people here, we said, hey, you can do $300,000 to $500,000 a year on Airbnb, cash flow net to you, and get your money back within a year. I think a lot of people would be like, okay, I'd be interested in that. So I think that's where I think there's a really strong value proposition there. And then how do you invest that? I tell people not to go crazy, right? Like go and buy something then, right? Go buy something that is on 2 acres. They can do something nice. Go look at what Isaac's doing, and the planters and the outdoor fire pit, all that stuff. That's great. But you should just do that in the property that you own. You never want to do that on an arbitrage property because all that goes to the owner, not you. And then you have Airbnb that maybe cash flows 15% or 70%. But that's great versus a long-term rental that does like 6%. And you you get, hopefully it appreciates, right? Can't guarantee that, but you can guarantee is depreciation, right? It will depreciate. From tax depreciation, you can do bonus or just normal depreciation, and that will save you a ton of taxes. And you combine those two together, you can build a really nice business for yourself. That's my model. That's what I preach. That's what I teach. That's what I do. Doing it for 7 years. I quit a $1 million a year investment banking job. My wife and I do this full time. We have 2 kids in New York City and a dog. And we raise our kids, and we have this nice business that we run. And there's definitely room for improvement. I think now at Airbnb, they're very focused on quality over quantity. And that message is loud and clear from Brian, right? So I think we, as on the supply side of that equation, like we have to recognize that.
Yeah, which is interesting too, because given my story, like I have mixed feelings about Airbnb because we got kicked off 2 weeks into our hosting journey where we were exclusively on Airbnb. And then for 5 days, which ended up being the biggest blessing in disguise because we took the Instagram seriously and drove this massive following and direct bookings rate and all that. But then 6 months later, we got kicked off again for 12 days that time.
Why? And why'd you get kicked off? Sorry.
No explanation.
Really?
And what was really difficult is like their customer service, at least this was 2022, was absolutely terrible. I mean, it's a foreign country. They absolutely don't care. They can't do anything. They can't escalate you. And what was really frustrating that second time was they told me there was an email sent to your email that's associated with your account with instructions, and you have to respond to that email or else you'll be suspended until you do. And I literally searched every email in my junk and every folder possible. There was no email that had come to me, and they said there was nothing they could do about it. And so the irony there is like Airbnb is a hospitality company, and the hospitality that they showed me was so far from hospitality. Anyway, we ended up getting restored both times. The second time was because I think I never found out even how we got restored, and I never found out why we were suspended. But by that point, I had like been sharing my journey publicly and built up a little bit of following. And then I actually knew somebody who worked at Airbnb, and they pulled some strings. So it was very disappointing. That being said, I think Brian is an incredible leader. I think the company's an amazing business model, one of the best that's ever been created. They've crushed it on branding and design and UI, which I obviously care a lot about. But again, it's sort of like a parable of, you were saying they're clearly focusing quality over quantity, focusing on that, which I applaud. But the balance between prioritizing your hosts versus prioritizing your guests is also another question. And it seems like the needle has swung dramatically in favor of the guest, which I don't fully support, because like if you read Danny Meyer's, book, Setting the Table, he talks about this, great book, this virtuous cycle of hospitality where, because a lot of corporations before that, I think he really introduced this philosophy, but just thought of like, okay, the customer is number one. And then, somewhere below that, we have other stakeholders, whether that's investors, we've got employees, we've got the communities we operate in, blah, 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 blah. And Danny was like, no, we're going to make our employee absolutely number one here. If a company will do that, if leaders of a company will do that, and then, clearly prioritize with a hierarchy, the customer is number two. And I know maybe it's number one, it's tied, but basically nothing trumps your relationship with your team. And if you apply that to Airbnb with their hosts, I think they would actually see a lot more quality. Of course, there's other measures. There's a lot of initiatives, and they've been very successful in rolling these out and creating like the OMG category and all these beautiful stays. But they alienate some of their best hosts, in my opinion, because of this. And anyway, it's an interesting parable.
No, like you definitely can. I didn't know about that. You got suspended on Airbnb. It's a very scary experience, especially if you're 100% Airbnb. We tell everyone to get the right technology platform so you can be on Booking.com, Expedia, Marriott, other OTAs, so you're not solely relying on Airbnb. Like the fundamental premise of what you just said there about Airbnb treating their employees as number one or customers as number one. The thing is, if you know about the kind of the two-sided marketplace concept and strategy, we are the supplier side of that equation. And the most important constituent to Airbnb is the guests, by far. If they own a demand side equation, we as hosts, on the supply side have to come to them. And that's kind of what they've done right now. You're right. It's completely swung the other way. It's the last few months have been pretty bad. There's some things I don't want to talk about publicly, but like there's a reason why they've kind of swung all the way in the other direction, given some internal challenges that they've had. But I think fundamentally, us as hosts, like we can only control what we control. They're going to be 70% of your book no matter what if you have a scaled business. So like direct bookings, I mean, it works great for live oak or the train or some very specific resort, but 99, kind of back to our original point, like the commodity stays are more commoditized stays are, it might be kind of 80+% of the platform. We're not going to get the direct bookings. Airbnb, the brand is too powerful. Like your direct booking site will never look as good as Airbnb's. Like the trust will never be there. The payments won't be there. It's just not going to be as good. So you kind of rebook some of your existing guests, great, or your past guests, great, right? But I think there's a natural ceiling there if you have, depending on your product, right? Would you agree with that? By the way,
absolutely.
There's like this
I think that
stay fives. There's a lot of this direct booking movement out there,
right.
And I think a little bit, it's kind of like, and a lot of it's marketing speak, to be candid. But if you have a beautiful property like yours, like go for it. Like you should definitely do that, right? You don't need Airbnb.
For sure. That's the key. So like people look at the Live Oak Lake story or several other properties like it, but that's a good one because it's the full life cycle. You see the numbers, it's insane. And they're like, okay, what was the secret sauce behind this? Okay, they did direct bookings. All right, they did Instagram, blah, 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 blah. And they're missing what actually made it great, which was the design, the unique story, the positioning, and all these little tiny details that came together. And so direct bookings and social media, which go hand in hand, are sort of these two of these elements where people come to me all the time asking for this, magic wand or this secret formula. And I'm not going to sell some course to them either, or there's people that try to do this, but that sort of like tell you how to figure out direct bookings, figure out social media. I love educating people on like how to actually create this one of a kind experience. But if you focus on the product in that sense and the hospitality that you're delivering, then you're going to have a story worth telling, and you're going to have a property that's going to be worthy of word of mouth marketing, which is the most valuable marketing campaign you can ever embark on. And social media is just a way to augment that. And I think the Live Oak story was a good example. We didn't even build it to direct market it. I wasn't even really aware of that. I was just trying to create something that I would truly like floor to stay at. And it turned out a lot of other guests wanted that. And then when we got kicked off Airbnb, it was this perfect kick in the seat of the pants of, okay, now we built our house on somebody else's land. We were exclusively on Airbnb, so we weren't even on some of these other platforms. And so I was like, okay, all right, we're going. Of course, we saw all the success we didn't even talk about that. I've shared it before, but we had $40,000 of bookings in one week after running a $950 giveaway, that first incident when we got kicked off of Airbnb. And so that sort of like totally jump-started and launched this all-in campaign on giveaways, and then eventually creating our own content, which led to virality, which led to 80% direct booking rates overall, and like, $1 million for 7 keys in 1 year and whatnot. But all of that was because we had this beautiful property. And so if you think that there's some magic sauce that you can just take from the Live Oak Lake story and apply it in terms of direct bookings or social media, you can spend a lot of money on ads. You can build the fanciest direct booking website. You can do all these other things, and good luck getting attention or converting that attention.
I really love what you said there. Actually, I think it really encapsulates this entire conversation. It's like, have a story worth telling, right? You got to build that story worth telling. And I think you did that with Live Oak, right? Where like all the pieces made sense, where that story was actually really compelling. Like me telling a story about an arbitrage property in Philadelphia, like, not many people are going to be like, oh, well, this is this story makes you want to stay there. Just like, oh, okay, well, what's the price and how close are you from the thing that I'm trying to get to today, right? So, So look, I love this conversation. I think it's great to hear it from your side. Just the origin story, like the experiential. As we wind down the conversation, I want to just hear kind of your view on like moat, right? Competitive moat. Like, do you think about that as part of the hospitality experience, or is that just like a nice, not consequence, but a nice derivative of building something really strong and unique because someone else can replicate it, or does that part of like the original kind of business case that you think about as you advising your students in your community?
I think it is a nice moat in that a lot of these markets that we're building in are pretty remote and therefore are low regulation areas. You can build quickly. The land is cheap. All of that is on your side when you're the developer, and it's against you when you've built a really successful property and someone wants to come emulate it and build right next door to you. But this is where the moat comes in. You've built something that, for one, only you can build, assuming you have the right vision and you can execute it. And you've told that story well, and you've built a brand. And this is where brand really becomes important, because when you have a big audience, Kleenex is a great example of this, where this one company sort of like monopolizes this product because they were first or they were best or whatever it was. They were first probably. And now there's plenty of other products, but everybody calls it that. Or Windex is another example. These are poor analogies, but basically you get that first mover advantage.
Yeah.
And so like that's the way I think of moat. But again, that comes from actually having something that's worthy of word of mouth and building that brand. And so yeah, there's different moats. One of the extreme experiential properties I've highlighted is it's called Sheldon Chalet. Have you heard of this?
No. Please tell me.
So it's in Denali National Park in the shadow of Mount Denali. It's like a little 5-acre inholding in the national park. The story is, back in the 1950s, there was this bush pilot who flew all around rural Alaska, and he knew like all the best areas. And under the Homestead Act, he laid claim to this 5-acre parcel. It was just a little rock outcropping, but I mean, this stunning location. Nobody could get to it. You had to fly in. And so the government gave it to him. And then the national park came and, totally surrounded them, and it became this iconic place. So now his kids, he passed away a few years ago, in 2018, built this lodge. You got to look it up. It's called Sheldon Chalet. And it took them 3 years to build. They had to helicopter in every building material, every single, there was no staging area. It was some of the most extreme weather conditions on earth. And it costs a minimum of $35,000 a night to stay there, and they're booked out. And many nights it's over
I'm looking at it now.
It's over $100,000 many nights, and literally books out. Yes, Jesus. I'm serious. So here's the crazy thing: you have to take a 45-minute helicopter ride just to get there, and talk about a moat. Nobody's gonna be building next door. So like, being in a supply constrained market is awesome and amazing, and is one moat. But the way I think of it is like, and in that case, they were able to layer two, and that's why it's such an exceptional story. But like, build a product, build an experience that is iconic, that is immersive, that people are going to, swoon over, that they're going to want to come back naturally 3 or 4 times, like they did with Live Oak Lake in 1 year. And you've got yourself a pretty nice moat, even if somebody wants to go buy the field next to you and build something like it.
Oh. No one's going to build a moat next to you. No one's going to build one next to you. You dominated. You dominated what you've done, and I appreciate the time today. It's really cool to hear from someone that I respect your work. I know how hard it is, and even though we kind of came in with differing viewpoints, just now that we're post election, I think just like a less people can disagree, right? But if you're just like kind of just like a real conversation and just hear someone out, like you make some really good points. Actually, we learned a lot today, and I think if you're listening now, just like get the information, listen, right? Like some things might work for me, won't work for you. Might work for Isaac, might not work. Just take the best of what you hear for someone else, construct your own strategy that works for you. There's a lot of different ways to win at this game, but just listen, keep an open mind. Isaac, question I like to ask people, the last question I like to ask is, business is a hard game, a lot of volatility along the way, and wouldn't be where we are today without the people around us that helped us. Like, what's a person that's been on your journey that you're most grateful for, that's been really helpful for you as you built what you built today?
Oh man, that's a great question. There's been a lot of people that I owe a lot of success to, and I could never have done any of what I've done without my family and friends. But I guess I would like to point back to my grandpa, who was so instrumental in my life as a child growing up, and he was a fine home builder, built custom homes for people, but very modest and understated person. He lived in an RV for 20 years before building his dream home because he wanted to save up and not take on any debt. And everything he did, he did well. He didn't try to do everything, but what he did well. And so growing up and going to these job sites of these really impressive projects with him was was very impressive, was impressionable to me. But just as much as that, in terms of making an impact, was being around him and seeing the way that he, kept his shop and he kept his tools organized and he kept his office space. And it's been a huge inspiration to me, and like really caring about details, being detail oriented, not stressing, not living, I think you can take that too far and never be at peace because nothing's quite perfect. But whatever you're doing, like focus on it, give it everything. You don't need to spend a ton of money, but do it well and develop a reputation around that. And no matter what field you're in, you're going to be successful, and you're going to become a magnet for other people that see that passion, see that precision, see that commitment to excellence in everything that you do, and are going to gravitate towards that.
Well, shout out to Grandpa French then. Like it comes through your work and just your copy and the marketing that everything that you put out there. I think everything's very A+ and congruent. And I'm excited to follow you on your journey, and keep sharing. And it's great to have this conversation with you. I'm glad we were able to come off of the comment section on Rich Summers' Instagram and have a proper conversation. What's the best place for people that find you?
I'm on socials at IsaacFrench_, and I write a weekly newsletter, which I put several hours into every week to try to share something that anybody who's in hospitality, or honestly any business, can apply at isaacjfrench.com. It's called the Experiential Hospitality Newsletter. Love to have you sign up. And Michael, thank you very much for inviting me on and having a nice, civilized discussion about this. I learned a lot, and I like what you said about keeping an open mind. I think there's a lot for all of us to learn from each other.
Absolutely. And so we'll actually put Isaac's the newsletter link or the link to his website in the show notes. So highly recommend subscribing to the newsletter. It's a great read. I subscribe to it. It's a great read. I think it'll continue to educate you on your respective short-term rental journey, real estate journey. Isaac, thanks again. Have a great rest of the day.
You too. Thank you.
If you found this episode valuable, please make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can get notified when I put out new content on Airbnb investing. And if you want to learn about how to work with me more directly, I have links below on my description. Click on those and let's figure out how I can help you with your Airbnb investing journey.